My name is Marissa Caldwell. I'm 29 years old, and I've always been the quiet one in my family. Not shy, not timid, just observant. I grew up in a house where the loudest voice controlled the room, where whoever spoke first, fastest, and most confidently always won. Silence wasn't seen as maturity or thoughtfulness, it was interpreted as weakness. And my older sister Natalie learned how to use that to her advantage early on. Natalie was everything our family admired: outgoing, bold, socially magnetic. She dominated every space she entered without even trying. Teachers loved her. Relatives praised her endlessly. She knew exactly how to perform for approval, and she did it flawlessly. I was the contrast, the quiet one, the one people didn't quite understand and didn't bother trying to. If I had to name the sentence that followed me my entire childhood, it would be this: why can't you be more like your sister? Natalie received applause. I received comparison. She brought home trophies and praise. I brought home silence and side remarks. Any small failure of mine was scrutinized. Any major failure of hers was forgiven. Our parents didn't believe they played favorites, but the imbalance shaped everything. If Natalie got into trouble, there was always an excuse ready for her. If I did, it was a disappointment. So I stopped trying to explain myself. I learned to retreat into my own world: computers, quiet work, independence. On the day I turned 18, I packed my things and left without a scene or a goodbye speech. No rebellion, just distance. That became my pattern: quiet exits, quiet growth, quiet survival. I don't attend many family gatherings anymore because pretending I belong to a space that never welcomed me is exhausting. Still, once in a while, curiosity or some false sense of obligation pulls me back. Last Thanksgiving was one of those times. It was hosted at my Aunt Deborah's home, a massive white house on a manicured suburban street with pillars out front and a driveway wide enough to stage a luxury car commercial. I arrived late intentionally. Arriving early always meant standing alone while conversations danced around me like I wasn't there. As I turned onto the street, a familiar tension settled into my chest. Not fear, not dread, just readiness. I parked along the curb in my old BMW. The paint was chipped, one headlight was permanently fogged, and the bumper had a small dent. To most people, it looked like a forgotten relic. To someone who actually understood cars, it was a perfectly tuned '98 E36 manual. Quiet, balanced, deceptively powerful. The second I shut the door, I heard laughter cutting across the yard. "That's your car?" Natalie's voice carried easily. "Did you pull that thing out of a junkyard or borrow it from a zombie movie set?" Laughter followed immediately. Cousins, an uncle, even my father, smirking into his drink. I locked the car calmly, walked forward, and gave my sister a small nod. "It runs great." "Oh, I'm sure," she said, strolling toward me. "I'm just amazed it survived the drive." Even my mother smiled, the familiar, proud smile she always saved for Natalie when she entertained the room. No one asked how I had been. No one greeted me. I was simply the setup to a joke they'd been waiting to deliver. Natalie slung an arm around my shoulder like we were close. "Come on, I'm just joking. You always take things so seriously, Marissa." I smiled because that was my role. Inside, the house was loud and overcrowded. Football blasting on the television, kids screaming between rooms, aluminum food trays stacked everywhere. I exchanged polite greetings, discussed yoga retreats with Aunt Carol, and tried to slip into invisibility. But Natalie never lets her audience drift. She made jokes about me living off the grid, making my own soap, probably surviving on herbal tea and silence. She joked about me still being single. Each comment landed softly as laughter, but its purpose was sharp and precise, to remind everyone exactly where I stood. The worst part wasn't the mockery. It was how natural it felt to everyone, like I had been assigned this role permanently and no one had ever questioned it. No one spoke up until Ryan, my cousin Lisa's husband, entered holding his phone. He was a tech guy, observant, analytical in a way most people weren't. "Hey, Marissa," he said slowly. "Quick question. Your license plate frame. It's a dealership tag. Did you buy from there?" I met his eyes. "No, it's mine." His eyebrow lifted. "You mean you work there, or you own it?" "It's complicated." He turned his phone back toward himself and did a quick lookup. I saw my plate number on his screen. Beneath it was the corporate registration name tied to one of my holding companies. His posture shifted subtly, his entire expression changing. "Oh," he murmured. Natalie hadn't noticed yet. She was still commanding the room across the yard, but something in the air had shifted, almost imperceptibly. Ryan looked at me again. "You own the dealership on Elm Street?" I didn't confirm or deny it. I simply held his gaze and gave him the same quiet smile I always did. That silence answered everything. And that was the first crack in a story my family had believed for decades. But the real impact hadn't landed yet. Not until dinner. Dinner was called not long after that moment with Ryan, and everyone gradually funneled into the dining room like nothing unusual had just happened. The long table was extended with its usual fold-out leaf, dishes passed from hand to hand, chairs scraping across hardwood floors. It looked the same as every other holiday. Loud, crowded, comfortable in its routine. I took my usual seat near the end, wedged between the sideboard and the kitchen entry, a position that always made me feel like I was halfway in the room and halfway erased. Natalie, of course, claimed one of the central seats near our parents. My mother fussed over the cranberry sauce like it was a personal mission. My father launched into a discussion with Uncle Roy about interest rates, as if either of them truly understood what they were debating. Forks clinked, glasses filled, overlapping conversations bloomed across the table. For a brief moment, it almost felt normal. Almost. Natalie didn't like that the room's attention had drifted away from her for too long. She lifted her voice just enough to pull it back. "So, Marissa," she said casually, "how's life in that mysterious little rust bucket of yours? Did you finally replace the cardboard floor mats, or are you still living dangerously?" A few people laughed. Someone repeated "mystery machine" under their breath, like it was suddenly the cleverest joke in the world. I didn't look up. I focused on slicing my turkey into neat pieces. Natalie pressed on. "Actually, Mom, Dad," she added, tilting her head playfully toward them. "Have you even seen her car? I swear it looks like it loses horsepower every time the wind changes direction." My mother laughed softly. "Natalie, be nice." "I am being nice," she said. "I'm just amazed she's willing to drive something like that when she could just ask for help. I mean, we're family, right? If she needed something, we'd help her." That familiar heat crept up my neck. That special brand of humiliation where mockery is disguised as generosity, where if I protested, I would look ungrateful instead of wounded. Before I could speak, Ryan cleared his throat. "Actually," he said evenly, "that car is pretty incredible. You should see the engine bay. Cleanest E36 I've ever seen. Manual transmission. Tuned properly. It probably pulls better than most of what's sitting out in that driveway." Natalie blinked. The flow of her performance stuttered for the first time all night. "You've seen it?" Ryan nodded without hesitation. "Yeah. Popped the hood earlier. Whoever built it knew exactly what they were doing." She gave a stiff laugh. "Okay, sure, but it's still—" "The plate lookup," Ryan continued, not bothering to look at her now, "pulls up a corporate registration under Caldwell Holdings. Same company tied to the dealership on Elm Street." The table went quiet. Not dramatically, not instantly. It was more like the sound slowly drained out of the room as people processed what they thought they had just heard. My father frowned. My mother looked at Ryan with visible confusion. "My plate is registered under one of my companies," I said calmly. "That's all." My mother's eyes widened. "Companies?" "More than one," I said quietly. Natalie scoffed immediately. "Okay, but what does that even mean? An LLC for tax stuff or something? Lots of people do that." Ryan let out a soft laugh. "She owns the dealership." The words hit the table like dropped glass. For a split second, no one spoke. Then the reactions exploded all at once. Aunt Deborah leaned forward asking about discounts. Uncle Roy suddenly wanted to talk investments. My father's entire posture changed as he turned toward me with a seriousness I had never seen before. My mother stared at me like she was meeting me for the first time. Natalie said nothing. She just stared. Her mouth was slightly open, but no sound came out. Not shock exactly. Something sharper. Something wounded and confused, like a rule she'd lived by her entire life had suddenly been rewritten without her consent. "You've been sitting on this?" she finally said, her voice low. "All this time?" "Sitting on what?" I asked quietly. "The business, the money, the dealership, all of—" "I didn't think it mattered," I replied. She laughed once, bitterly. "Didn't matter. You let me stand here and joke about your car." "I didn't let you," I said evenly. "You chose to." Her posture shifted. The playful edge evaporated. "You always do this," she snapped. You sit there acting superior, judging everyone in silence while you're out there playing Monopoly with real property. I never hid it out of spite, I said. I just didn't advertise. What, you think that makes you better than me? She shot back. And there it was. Not the car, not the money, not the dealership. The real wound had finally been exposed. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. The truth had already done the work for me. For the first time in my life, the entire table was watching her instead of me. Something inside me settled into a quiet, final clarity. I pushed my chair back and stood. I'm going to get some air. No one stopped me. The cold November night wrapped around me as I stepped outside, my breath fogging in the darkness. My hands shook slightly, not with anger, but with something far more powerful. Certainty. The certainty that the version of me my family had constructed for nearly 3 decades no longer existed. I didn't drive home that night. I drove without direction, the steady hum of the engine filling the silence as suburban streetlights passed in slow flashes. When I finally stopped at a quiet overlook on the edge of town, midnight had already settled in. I rested my hands on the wheel and stared out into the dark. They hadn't changed, but I had, and I was done pretending otherwise. The weeks after Thanksgiving were strangely quiet. Not the hollow, aching quiet I was used to after family encounters, but the kind that feels clean, almost restorative. I stopped checking the family group chat altogether. I let missed calls from my parents go to voicemail. I didn't block anyone, but I no longer made myself available for emotional cleanup duty. A few days after Thanksgiving, my mother left a message. Her voice was soft and carefully cheerful, the way it always sounded when she wanted something. Hi, sweetheart. We were just talking about you. Your father thinks you might be able to help your cousin Josh with a better lease. He's graduating soon. Call us when you can, okay? I never returned the call. The truth was, the exposure at that dinner had changed everything. For years, they treated me like I barely existed, and the moment they thought I had something of value, they all suddenly remembered my name. It wasn't flattering. It was clarifying. I poured my focus into my work. The dealership was moving into its strongest quarter of the year, despite the seasonal slowdown. I had bought it 3 years earlier under a quiet trust after the previous owners nearly ran it into the ground. I rebuilt it slowly and deliberately, hiring trustworthy managers, restructuring the service department, and ending the predatory lending practices that had bled customers dry. I never attached my face to it. I never wanted the visibility. I wanted stability. I wanted peace. That pursuit of peace was why I had built everything the way I did, quietly. The only person from my family I kept in contact with was Ryan. The way he handled Thanksgiving stayed with me. He didn't pry. He didn't gossip. He didn't suddenly treat me like an ATM. A couple weeks after Thanksgiving, he sent me a text thanking me for validating his suspicions about the car and joking that he had adopted my quiet exit strategy at his own office party. It was the first time I'd genuinely laughed in days. Christmas passed with a storm of passive-aggressive social media posts from my mother about family, loyalty, and gratitude. Natalie never contacted me directly, but I saw her name appear in my LinkedIn notifications twice. She was watching from a distance. Early January, my parents' landline appeared on my phone again. Against my better judgment, I answered. My mother invited me to a small birthday dinner for my father. She said Natalie wanted to talk, and that there had been a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. I declined the invitation. That winter became a quiet turning point in my life. I returned to restoring cars for pleasure instead of profit. I started running in the mornings. I read more. I even began therapy, something I had avoided for years because I didn't believe I deserved support. It changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. For the first time, I wasn't living in reaction to my family. I was just living. And that's when the email arrived. The subject line read, "Help." It was from Natalie. The message itself was short and stiff. No greeting, no apology. Things are tight right now. There's an issue with the bank and the lease on my car. I could really use your help getting an extension. I know you have contacts. Anything you can do would be appreciated. No acknowledgement of Thanksgiving, no remorse, just a request. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the laptop. 3 days passed before I responded. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to be absolutely certain of what I was doing. When I finally replied, my tone was perfectly neutral, corporate even. I asked for the lease details, the payment history, and the most recent bank correspondence. Natalie responded quickly. too quickly. Desperation makes people fast. What she didn't mention was what I already knew from a discreet inquiry at the dealership. She and her husband Eric had been dropping my name for months, pushing staff for unauthorized perks and early approvals. They were living well beyond what their credit allowed and assuming someone would save them from the consequences. They assumed that someone would still be me. That's when my purpose shifted from emotional closure to strategic clarity. I met with Melina, the general manager of the dealership, the one person who knew I was the owner. I explained that a customer connected to me by name had been using that connection to manipulate the sales process. I didn't share the family history. I didn't need to. Melina understood boundaries and power better than anyone I had ever hired. "You want me to shut it down?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Let her think everything is working. Flag every file tied to her and her husband. I want final approval on anything connected to them." Melina smiled. "Understood." At the same time, my attorney, Dana, began pulling every communication Natalie and Eric had made with the dealership over the last year. Emails, calls, notes. The thread quickly revealed a pattern of entitlement disguised as familiarity. Then the invitation arrived. My cousin Ellie was getting married at a vineyard outside the city. Thick cardstock, custom calligraphy, formal dress code, and printed across the front in clean black letters was my name. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I smiled. Natalie would be there, and she would not be able to stop herself. Once I accepted the wedding invitation, everything moved with quiet inevitability. Natalie's email, the dealership files, the legal documentation, the upcoming public family setting where she would feel most secure. It all aligned too cleanly to ignore. I wasn't rushing anything. I had spent most of my life reacting. For the first time, I was designing the outcome. Natalie sent over the lease documents within hours of my reply. The lease was in her name, co-signed by her husband Eric. 2 missed payments, delinquency warnings from the bank. The familiar story of overextension masked as confidence. Her tone in every message was practiced humility mixed with entitlement. She thanked me for looking into it, told me how grateful she was I was finally being supportive, and slipped in small assumptions about notice of approval as if it were already settled. She still believed the old version of me was standing on the other side of her messages. She was wrong. Before making any decisions, I called Melina into my downtown office. The meeting was brief and precise. I explained that Natalie had been using my name to pressure sales staff for months. I didn't dramatize it. I simply laid out the facts. Melina reviewed the preliminary report Dana had started assembling and nodded slowly. "So we let her think she's getting the extension," she said. "Yes," I replied. "Let her complete every step on her end. Sign everything. Make the commitment irreversible from her perspective, but do not submit the final approval for financing." Melina's smile was subtle but unmistakable. That kind of silence is dangerous. "I know," I said. "That's why it works." While Melina handled the operational side, Dana assembled the legal record. It was thorough in a way only a seasoned corporate attorney could manage. Every unauthorized request, every name drop, every attempt to wield influence that was never hers to begin with. It formed a timeline of quiet manipulation that stretched nearly a year. I wasn't building revenge, I was building documentation. In the middle of it all, life continued. Natalie sent occasional casual texts pretending nothing was wrong between us. My mother left voicemails growing warmer by the week, mentioning family reconciliation, forgiveness, and the importance of not letting money change someone. I ignored all of it. For once, I had the advantage of time. A week before the wedding, Melina called with an update. Natalie had been at the dealership 3 times in 10 days. She was hovering, pressing, asking when everything would be finalized and when she could pick up the vehicle. Melina told her what I asked her to say, that there was a small internal delay but no reason for concern. Natalie accepted the explanation eagerly. She wanted this to be over. She wanted to arrive at the wedding with visible proof that she was still winning. That confirmation came the day before the ceremony. Melina notified me that the contract had been fully signed by Natalie and Eric, all financial disclosures completed, all documents prepared. Only one signature was missing. Mine. "Do not submit it," I told her. "I won't," she said without hesitation. That evening, I stood in my apartment, staring out over the city lights. The calm I felt surprised me. There was no gloating, no surge of adrenaline, only steady resolve. For the first time in my life, nothing Natalie did next would control the outcome. She was already walking into a story she didn't understand. The wedding would give her the stage, the audience, the illusion of power. An illusion, I had learned, was the most fragile structure of all. The day of the wedding arrived under a dull gray sky, the kind that threatened rain without committing to it. The vineyard sat just outside the city, rolling hills trimmed into something rustic and expensive by design. Gravel crunched beneath tires as guests arrived in waves of polished vehicles. I parked at the far edge of the lot in my usual car, the same one that had once been a punchline. I could have arrived in something louder, something unmistakably expensive, but that would have ruined the balance. I wasn't there to announce myself. I was there to observe. Inside, the ceremony unfolded with curated perfection. White chairs, soft music from a violinist, handwritten vows that earned quiet tears from the sentimental relatives. My cousin Ellie looked radiant, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel genuinely happy for her. Watching two people stand in certainty while knowing how fragile that certainty can be has a sobering effect. It always had for me. The reception was held in a long, glass-walled hall overlooking the vineyards. String lights glowed softly as night crept in. Champagne flowed freely. Laughter echoed with forced ease. This was the kind of setting where Natalie always thrived. A controlled environment. A visible stage. She found me during cocktail hour. "Marissa," she said, placing a hand on my arm as if we had never had a fracture between us. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "Ellie invited me," I replied evenly. "Of course. Still, it's good to see you." She hesitated just long enough to make the moment feel rehearsed. "And thank you for everything you've been doing for us. It really means a lot." "I'm still reviewing things," I said. Her smile flickered for half a second before resetting. "Of course. No rush. The dealership's been great so far." She said it like it was already done. Dinner was announced shortly after. Guests took their seats, and the speeches began. I listened politely while keeping one eye on my phone. Minutes before dessert was served, Melina's name appeared on my screen. "All documents signed on their end," she texted. "Vehicle released this afternoon. Waiting only on final submission." I typed back a single response. "Hold." Across the room, at the edge of the dance floor, Natalie lifted her glass toward me in a discreet toast. She was glowing with confidence, certain the victory had already been sealed. In that moment, she believed we had returned to our old balance, that she still occupied the higher ground, and I had resumed my place beneath her. She didn't understand that the contract she believed secured her future was the same one that would undo it. The rest of the reception passed without incident. Dancing, laughter, family photos arranged into neat rows of smiling faces pretending nothing had ever fractured between us. When the night wound down and guests began filtering out, Natalie found me again in the gravel lot. "You really came through," she said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "I knew I could count on you." I nodded. "Take care of the car." She laughed lightly. "Always." She drove off with confidence, with ownership she didn't actually possess. The next morning, before the city was fully awake, I made 2 calls. The first was to Melina. "Terminate the lease," I said calmly. She paused only a fraction of a second. "She already picked up the vehicle yesterday." "I know. Notify compliance. Release Dana's full report to legal." She exhaled once. "Understood." The second call was to Dana. "File the internal fraud report," I told her. "I want every protection in place before they even realize what's happening." "Already prepared," she said. "I'll initiate it this morning." What followed wasn't loud or public. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches, no family explosions. It unfolded the way real consequences always do, quietly, relentlessly, and without permission. Within days, the dealership's compliance department flagged Natalie's lease as invalid due to unauthorized influence and misrepresentation. Without my final signature, the contract she believed secured her upgrade had never legally existed. The vehicle she had been driving proudly since the wedding was still property of the dealership. A tow truck arrived at her house early on a weekday morning. By the time she stepped outside in a robe and slippers, the car was already being lifted onto the flatbed. Eric followed behind her in disbelief, shouting into his phone, demanding explanations that no one was obligated to give him. The illusion collapsed in silence. But the real consequences were only beginning. Natalie called me 37 times that morning. I know the exact number because I let every single call ring through to voicemail before I finally listened to the messages. Her voice shifted rapidly from confused to furious to panicked. Eric left 3 messages of his own, escalating from legal threats to desperate bargaining. By the time noon arrived, my parents had joined in. My phone sat on my desk, vibrating in steady intervals like a living thing I refused to acknowledge. The dealership's legal team moved faster than Natalie ever expected. The compliance investigation confirmed what Dana's documentation had already proven. She and Eric had used my name to pressure staff, misrepresented their authority, and attempted to secure financial approval under false pretenses. Without my final authorization, the lease had never been valid. The vehicle repossession was not retaliation. It was procedure. 2 days later, Natalie was formally blacklisted from all current and future transactions across our entire automotive network. That included financing, service centers, and every affiliated dealership under my holding group. Her credit account was flagged. Her reputation with regional auto lenders evaporated overnight. I never had to confront her directly. The system handled it for me. My mother finally reached me that evening. Her voice was small in a way I had never heard before. "Your sister says you did this to punish her." "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "I stopped protecting her from consequences." There was silence on the line, thick and heavy. "She's your sister," my mother murmured. "And she was my bully," I replied without raising my voice. "Both things can be true." She had nothing to say to that. The fallout rippled quietly through the family over the next few weeks. Relatives who once ignored my existence now looked at me with a confusion that bordered on fear. They didn't know where the boundaries were anymore. For the first time, I was not predictable, and unpredictability unsettles people who build their comfort on hierarchy. Natalie resigned from her job 3 weeks after the repossession. The financial pressure between her and Eric grew unbearable under the weight of flagged credit and stalled refinancing. Their marriage began to fracture under stress they had spent years hiding behind appearances. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't need to. Their collapse wasn't my victory. It was the unavoidable result of choices they made long before Thanksgiving. Easter came quietly. Smaller gathering. Fewer voices. Lower volume. I arrived late again out of habit. My old BMW rolled into the driveway without a single comment this time. No jokes, no laughter, no smug grins. Natalie was already there, seated at the far end of the living room beside Eric. She didn't look at me when I entered. Her shoulders were tight, her posture closed. The golden child glow was gone. What remained was simply a woman finally standing in consequence. My mother greeted me awkwardly. My father gave me a reserved nod. No one asked for favors. No one made jokes at my expense. It was as if the entire family had silently recalibrated where I now stood. Later, while dinner finished in the oven, Ryan approached me in the kitchen, holding a beer. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly. I glanced toward the living room where Natalie sat staring at a blank television screen that wasn't even turned on. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Every step." Dinner that night was the quietest meal I had ever shared with my family. No one spoke over me. No one laughed at my expense. When I spoke, the table listened. Not because I demanded it, not because I forced it, but because, for the first time, they finally understood what they had always overlooked. Silence had never been weakness. It had been restraint. I didn't stay long after dinner. I rarely do. Old habits don't disappear just because power shifts. As I drove away, the city lights rising ahead of me, I felt no triumph, no hunger for revenge, no lingering anger. Only peace. The quiet woman they underestimated for decades had built everything they never saw, and she didn't need to raise her voice to be heard anymore. Not ever again.